everyone, thanks for joining us. We'll get started in about 5 minutes. If you'd like to change your name or put what project search site you're affiliated with in the chat, please feel free to do so. We'll get started in about 5 minutes. All righty, I think we are ready to get started.
Okay, can you hear me? Just a quick test.
Yes, I can hear you. I want to make sure my sign language interpreter is ready and my closed captioner is ready. Beautiful. All right. Well, hello, everyone. My name is Hannah Buckner, and I am a MSW intern at USC, and I'm working with Diane Owens, who's the statewide coordinator for Project Search. And I'm so excited to be here with all of you and to start and host our first webinar series for the semester. We're hopeful that this will be a long-term thing for us, but we're really excited to have Ms. O'Brien here with us for our first webinar. So I'm going to give a little introduction about her and then allow her to get started. So Ms. O'Brien is the Director of Wellness, Prevention, and Advocacy Services at U of SC. She earned her bachelor's and master's degrees from USC and is proud to be working at her alma mater. In addition to serving on university committees such as Provost Advisory Committee on Women's Issues, Marguerite provides supervision to MSW students, is a University 101 instructor, and leads mindfulness sessions on campus. She is trained in mindfulness-based stress reduction and is a trained True Colors facilitator. Marguerite serves on national committees through the American College Health Association and often presents at regional and national conferences. Prior to working at USC, Ms. O'Brien was the Executive Director of City Year Columbia, National Project Coordinator for City Year Incorporated, and a Wellness Coordinator at Lexington Medical Center. Marguerite is also a certified personal trainer, fitness, and yoga instructor. She is active in the community and volunteers regularly for the American Red Cross and the Women's Shelter. We are really excited to have you here, Ms. O'Brien, and we're really excited to hear about your work and the things you'll be able to help us with our Project Search students. I also wanted to introduce our sign language interpreter, Ms. Caitlin, if she can say hello. She's going to be here working with us. And then you can also enable your live closed captions at the bottom of your screen if you feel led to do that. Ms. O'Brien, whenever you're ready.
Great. Thank you so much, Hannah. And thank you, everyone, for being here. Thank you, Caitlin, for doing the sign language interpretation for this group. I'm really thrilled to be here, thrilled to be asked. I always love to work with new groups of people. And so I won't belabor. Hannah introduced me wonderfully. Thank you. And we'll jump in. Let me share my screen and then we'll get started. Sorry about that. Hopefully. Okay, so hopefully you can see my screen and see the slide that says Stress Management and Wellbeing, which is the title of this presentation. So before we dive into any content, I would like for us to spend a mindful minute, literally just a minute once I explain the directions to us. And what I'd like for us to do is create a space and give ourselves permission to arrive in this space together, to spend this time together in this workshop. And we're just going to take literally a minute to just take a few breaths to give ourselves permission to release and let go of the to-do list for the rest of the day, give ourselves permission to be fully present here and leave other things sort of in a mental parking lot, if you will, for just a few minutes. I have a little chime that I'll ring to start and end the time, and so you'll know. And we'll begin in just 1 second. So make yourself comfortable in your space, adjusting your position, adjusting your body, just to be as comfortable as you can be. And close your eyes if that's comfortable for you, or just gazing downwards softly, allowing visual stimulation to be set aside if possible. And just bring attention to the way that you're sitting, or standing, or lying down, however you are, allowing your body to be in a posture that's alert and relaxed. Notice if there are places and spaces in your body that might be tense or tight or gripping unnecessarily, and see if you can soften, maybe unshrug the shoulders, maybe uncross the legs, Relax the jaw. And just begin to pay attention to the sensations of breathing in your body. Just noticing that ebb and flow of your breath, each gentle in-breath and each gentle out-breath. Giving yourself permission to let go of your busy day and be fully present right here. And as we end this time together in this mindful minute, you can wiggle, stretch, do whatever you need as you gently reawaken. Perhaps give yourself a little pat on the back of thanks, either physically or just in your mind, for giving yourself permission to do that, to enter this space of this meeting time that we have together, to be fully present. And just notice what you notice about how you're feeling. You might be feeling differently than before or not, which is fine. Just wanted to bring our attention to ourselves, our bodies, our minds, our spirits. So thank you for doing that with me. So I want to talk about stress, which sometimes isn't people's favorite topic, but I want to offer some information and then talk about maybe some different strategies that we can incorporate in our daily lives to help notice and then kind of cope with the stressors that we have, and think about for yourself, what are some things that are stressful for you? For every single one of us, it's slightly different. There might be things that are stressful for some people and not for others. For example, presenting to a group of people might be very stressful for someone in a way that's kind of a dreading kind of stress. For others, that same thing, giving a presentation is stressful, but it's in an exciting sort of way, like they're looking forward to it. So stress is very different. It's very much in the eye of the person who's dealing with the stress. And stress just is. It's not good or bad. It just is. There will always be stress in our lives. What we'll work on is maybe ways that we can help deal with it or manage it in our lives. And as Hannah mentioned, I've been trained in mindfulness-based stress reduction, MBSR, and one of the leaders there, one of my teachers there, gave this definition of stress that I really like. And she says, her name is Dr. T. Hilda White, and she says that stress is a relationship between the person and the environment that is perceived by the person as exceeding their coping resources and threatening their well-being. I want you to think about that definition for just a moment and think about maybe what might have resonated for you in that definition, what maybe kind of stood out for you. And I'll tell you a couple of things that stand out for me. One is that it's a relationship between the person and the environment that is perceived by the person. So perception. So like I said, stress is sort of in the eye of the person who's dealing with it. And so that perception by that person, it's stressful because if it's me under stress, I am perceiving that whatever it is beyond my ability to cope with it in that moment. And it's also another thing, threatening well-being. So it's in a place, whatever the stressor is, that I feel like it's a threat to my own well-being because I don't have the resources to cope with it. So stress can be a pretty scary thing. The thing about stress, though, as I had mentioned, is that it just is, right? It just is going to happen to each and every one of us on any given day. So for example, we might have the stress of having to empty the dishwasher before we go to bed at night. We might have to get it done. We might have the stress of a project being due. We have to turn something in and we're not maybe ready to do it. Or we might have a stress of we're in the car and someone cuts us off in traffic and we're almost in an accident. All of those things are stressful experiences. And we're planning a vacation. We're about to get on an airplane, haven't been on one in 2 years. I mean, all these things, right, can be stressors for us. And the thing of it is that stress, the way our body handles it physiologically, is the same. No matter if the stress is I've just swerved out of the way of an accident, to I'm about to get on an airplane or give a presentation, or go talk to someone new to me and I'm a little bit shy in social situations, whatever it is, right? So our bodies react in the same way physiologically, internally. And so this is what happens within our brain. There is some sort of stimulus into our nervous system. So we see something, we hear something, we feel something, whatever, we perceive something. And though that information is sent to our brain, and then the brain has to decide, is this a threat or a non-threat? So that piece of the definition, that feeling like it's threatening your well-being, kind of friend or foe. And so when that happens, when this is happening, it's all in just nanoseconds, microseconds, so fast. Chemicals, hormones and chemicals are flooding into our system to take care of whatever the threat is. So you might be familiar with the fight or flight or freeze mechanism of our sympathetic nervous system. So that gets turned on. So essentially, it's a human function for safety and security. And so it makes sure that blood flow goes to like our internal organs, our brain, our hearts, our lungs, those tissues. It shuts down things that we don't need to do in that moment. And so it affects our brain. So you might know in your own self that you experience headache, stomach ache, shoulder muscle tension somewhere. You might feel like your hands start to grip. You make fists with your hands. Your heart rate's going to go up. Your pulse is going to increase. All these things happen to take care of that perceived threat by the nervous system. And so then your body is going to stay in that heightened state of arousal until the threat is diminished or over. And it takes a few minutes. Those chemicals have to run through our bodies anyway, even if the threat is like, oh, I thought I saw a spider and I'm scared of spiders, and oh, it's dust on the floor. Like your body, it's going to happen in your body no matter what. And then once the threat is gone, your body returns to its normal state called homeostasis. So it's your normal heart rate, your normal pulse rate, all the systems that we're not getting as much blood, the blood is going back like to your extremities, your fingers might get a little cold during that time. All that stuff is going back to its sort of normal state. What also happens is, now this is a physiological thing, we can't change it from happening, we can kind of mitigate it. One of the things that happens too is we think, right? We're always thinking, we're humans, we're thinking creatures. And so when something happens, we have thoughts about it. And those thoughts affect our behavior, our beliefs, our feelings, and then our behaviors. And it starts to become a cycle that we can learn to sort of, I'll say break the cycle, but we can sort of learn how to interrupt the cycle. And so this is one of the ways this cycle, this is what it looks like. There's a situation, something happens. And this particular graphic said criticize at work. But let's say this something that happened is that you decided to ask a friend to go have lunch. And they say no. They tell you no. And so immediately we have a thought. And maybe the thought is, there's something wrong with me, they don't like me, I'm not good enough for them, whatever it is. We all have thought patterns that we typically go to when something happens that we aren't, fond of, or just we've made a mistake or we've had a setback or something. And so we have the thought that we will have. And that then we feel a certain way about it. And our body also has that physiological reaction, right? So let's say you might, and what I want us to do too is to know to check in with ourselves, right? Like, okay, I'm having this thought. How do I feel now? Am I feeling sad? Am I feeling worthless? Am I feeling angry that this person rejected me? Am I feeling lonely now that I have no one to eat lunch with? And then also being aware of what's going on in your body. Are muscles tensing? Is your heart rate raising? How are you reacting physiologically as well? Is your stomach starting to hurt? And then all of that. So the situation happens. Someone said no to go to lunch with us. We think, well, I'm not likable. We feel sad, lonely, maybe frustrated. My stomach is starting to hurt. I feel a little bit of a headache coming on. And then, so what do? I decide, well, you know what? I'm not going to ask anybody else to lunch. I'm going to avoid that person, but I'm also not going to put myself out there to ask other people to lunch because for some reason I'm not a likable person. So we believe this. And then guess what happens? You have an opportunity to ask someone else for lunch. Maybe there's a new person, or you just thought, I'm going to try and be a good friend. You're like, you know what, last time it didn't work out for me, so I'm not going to do it. And you kind of stay in that spiral. You stay in that, we call it thinking traps. The thought that the person didn't like you is why they said no to go to lunch. I call it stinking thinking. One of my colleagues years ago used to call it stinking thinking. And so we can learn how to recognize that thought pattern and then put it in an intentional pause, because our beliefs affect our behaviors, and it can become that cycle that we can't kind of get off that merry-go-round, if you will, use that metaphor. So I want to talk a little bit about that stinking thinking, that unhealthy versus healthy thinking. And I do want to say at the outset too, that the idea of quote unquote healthy thinking doesn't mean that it's positive thoughts 100% of the time. No. What it means is that you have an idea, a belief in yourself and of self-efficacy, so that you are able to succeed at a task, your own belief that you can execute behaviors necessary to produce an outcome of a performance. You're also, when you're thinking in a healthy manner, you're also being willing to be vulnerable, to admit when you need help and get the support that you need. And I think, quite frankly, that is a sign of strength more than of weakness. You also, again, when we're thinking in a healthy manner, we are aware of that self-talk. And I'm going to go through these unhealthy thinking patterns in a minute, that stinking thinking. So when we think about our self-talk, if we can even think to ourselves, if I say to myself, ask someone to go to lunch, they say no, my thought is, I am not worthy, or I'm not likable, or I'm too weird for people, whatever it is. When I say that to my best friend, my mom, my sister, my brother, probably not, right? So listen for that self-talk and just notice when you do it, maybe why you do it, and we'll talk about how we can change that up a little bit. And when we're thinking in a more healthy manner, we're more optimistic, and it doesn't mean ignoring the bad things are happening or being sort of like everything is fine. No, it's just having an optimistic attitude and flexible thinking in that, okay, I can overcome this. I can figure out ways. I can figure out ways to get some resources to help me out. I might not have figured out this math problem today, but tomorrow, maybe I'll be able to. I can ask for help. I can look in the textbook. I can Google how to figure this one out. Thank goodness for Google in this day and time, right? There's also the idea of emotion regulation, which is our ability to manage and respond to an emotional experience. So think about your own self just today. There's probably many times throughout the day today that you are able to manage your emotions, and you're not, without even being aware of it, honestly, because you're used to it. So for example, if I don't know, if I stub my toe at work or cut my, finger, paper cut or something, I could scream out and, I'm not, and I like, no, I'm not going to do that because it hurts, sure, but I'm not going to lash out. Or someone says something, in passing me in the hallway or in the classroom, and I don't like it, but I don't have to respond right back to that. So knowing that about yourself, taking that moment, taking that intentional pause, knowing what motivates you, but also what triggers you, to, again, that emotional awareness to know and to put in that pause, which I'll talk about in just another moment or two. But I do want to talk about these stinking thinking or thinking traps that are on the slide. So some examples, and you might recognize yourself in some of these. Overgeneralizing. So for example, the example that I gave a little while ago, you ask someone to have lunch, they say no, I'm not worthy, that person doesn't like me. Overgeneralizing would be someone who then also says, no one likes me. Nobody wants to have lunch with me. No one's going to want to have lunch with me in the future. All right, that's a thinking trap. It's overgeneralizing, because you know what? We also don't know why that person said no, right? Because didn't ask them, right? That black and white thinking, things are one way or the other. There's no in between. There's no gray in between. life is full of gray, that we live in the gray, we live in the uncertainty, right? So it's very rare that something is entirely one way or the other. So seeing something as good or bad only, or wrong or right, usually isn't the most healthy way of thinking about something. Mind reading, jumping to conclusions about what others are thinking without any evidence. So person says no to go to lunch, they don't like me. They must think I'm not a nice person, or they must think that I'm not fun to be around. Well, I have no idea. I can't read people's minds. I'm pretty sure most of us can, right? So just jumping to that conclusion without finding out. That personalization is then thinking that everything is about you. And lots of times it's not. I hate to tell us, the world doesn't revolve around me individually or any of us, right? So, and I'm kind of making light of that one, but it is like for some people, things that happen, their belief is that it's happening to them only, or them specifically. No, it really isn't. And if anything, the past 2 years have taught us, we have all, and we are all still living with a pandemic, right? So it's not that the pandemic just is happening to me, it's happening to all of us. If folks that had to end up, learning from home, working from home, not the only one that had to do it. Not your workplace or your school didn't tell you go home to continue your studies or your work, just you. That was everybody, right? Focusing on the negative only and ignoring the positive in a situation. So again, some of us have that tendency to only look at the negative thing. Lots of times a good example of this sometimes is a feedback that you might get from someone for your performance in anything. So a work performance or a classroom performance, or feedback on a paper or a project. They might say, this was really good overall, but here's this one thing or one or two things I think you could change to make this stronger. And for folks that have that thinking trap of focusing on the negative, all they see and hear is that one negative thing, or those two negative things. They can't take in the positive. So again, giving ourselves that ability to pause and sort of stop that cycle and think for a moment. Is this true? Like, is the whole thing a bad presentation or a bad assignment that I turned in because there's one thing that they got, two things I got feedback on? No, right? So we got to take that time. The perfectionistic thinking is for folks who do not allow themselves to make mistakes. Spoiler alert for y'all. Everybody makes mistakes. We are all human. We all make mistakes, and it is okay. Our mistakes do not define us. And failure, as one of my colleagues says all the time, failure is just feedback. It is data. It's information that we receive to let us know that let me try a different way. Let me figure out something else. If you can think back to something that you learned in life how to do that was maybe difficult for you at first. So maybe riding a bike. Kept falling off the bike, kept falling off the bike. I had more skin knees as a child than I can count because of falling off my bike. But I kept getting back on and trying, right? So bringing that energy to things because that was a failure. I fell off the bike. That was a failure. I probably cried a lot of the time, but got back on the bike. So, and I know that's a simple example, but I think it's instructive because we can make mistakes and we can grow and learn from them. In fact, really, that's the only way I think we grow and learn. And having that flexible mindset, we talked about a little bit earlier, being, willing to say like, okay, I don't have this yet. I don't understand this concept yet. Even that little 3-letter word, I find is very helpful. Another colleague of mine said that she heard, I think, a parent tell her that the word fail stands for first attempt in learning. And I love that because that's exactly what it is. Again, it's just feedback. It's just some data. Some of us are catastrophizers. Catastrophizing is the next thinking trap, and it's focusing on the worst case outcome or overestimating the likelihood of negative events. This might be yours. You might have, I'm hoping that you all are saying, oh, this one sort of is what I do most of the time or some of the time. I have a colleague who's definitely a catastrophizer, and she'll admit it, One thing, I have a headache means I have a brain tumor. So, or it's going to rain and it's going to be a hurricane or a tornado, right? Every single time. So the worst case scenario, it's not a bad idea to plan for, like, we do live in a state where hurricanes happen. So have that plan for what you would do if, but not to expect every rainstorm especially during that season, is going to be a hurricane, right? A devastating thing. And also think you got, if again, we can step back and take that pause. What is the likelihood of this happening? What is the likelihood of this thing happening? Okay, so a student, I work with a lot of students here at USC, I got a bad grade on a test. And then a catastrophizer might say, I'm going to fail this class. Oh my gosh, I'm going to get kicked out of my program. I'm going to get kicked out of school. Like, how do we get from a bad grade on one test to getting kicked out of school? That's a big leap, right? So you have to think about, okay, what is the likelihood of this happening? What is the likelihood of this happening? Okay, and so let's bring it back a little bit. Okay, you got a bad grade on a test. What's the worst that can happen? Or what's the best that can happen? Maybe I learn a new way to study. Maybe I found a different study group. Maybe I discover, I talk to my professor and come up with other ways to take my notes. There's lots of options that can come up, right? And then finally, the minimizing and discounting. And this is one that I tend to do a lot, is sort of my go-to thinking trap, if you will. And that's maximizing on that failure. So kind of focusing in on that failure and downplaying successes. It kind of goes hand in hand with the focusing on the negative, but it could, for me, a lot of times it translates into, Hannah had mentioned that I also teach fitness classes and yoga classes and things outside of my work here. And it also can translate into me feeling insecure there. So I might take another instructor's class and think like, wow, they taught a great class. I learned so many things. And someone else might say to me, well, you teach great classes. Like, nah, I really don't. I mean, mine are okay, but my gosh, that person's class was so good. So again, we all have our thinking trap, or the method of, our thought process, that our self-talk, and we can learn how to mitigate it or cope with it in a way by just maybe trying to flip the switch on the way that we think about it. So when we talk about, for example, that overgeneralizing again, when someone's like, person doesn't want to go to lunch with me, they think I'm too weird, nobody likes me. Nobody? Really? I like you. That all or nothing kind of thinking as well. That kind of goes together. So on the other side of that slide, you'll see this SOS technique, stop, observe, and shift. And the stop is like literally mentally telling yourself to stop once you've noticed that you're falling into one of your thinking traps, and give yourself the opportunity to notice, address that thought, and interrupt that cycle that I showed earlier, right? So just give yourself that pause, stop. And really, I find it very helpful to take a couple of deep breaths when I do that. Stop, breathe, observe. Observe what you're saying to yourself and how it's making you feel. And also noticing physically what's going on in your body. We talked about that a little while ago, right? So what are you saying to yourself and how is it making you feel? Very often that self-talk, so in the example I gave about myself, like saying like someone else's class was so great and I learned so much from them, and mine were like, yeah, mine are just okay. I'm really not that good of an instructor. Wait a minute, why am I saying that to myself? It's making me feel bad about myself. Is it true? Well, I don't know. How can I check that out? Well, maybe if I could believe other people when they tell me that my classes are good and they get a lot out of my classes, then okay, maybe I should believe that and kind of insert that into my thought process, right? And then shifting our cognitive, so our thought processes, our emotional or behavioral response by using some positive coping skills and techniques. And some of that includes reflecting, thinking. For some of us, we're writers, writing in a journal or just writing down. This is what I say to myself when I have had a setback or make a mistake. And this is something that I would say to my friend if they made the same mistake. So then you have a different sentence to say to yourself later on, the next time that comes up. I hope that makes sense. Okay, so I want to teach us a technique before I switch to the next slide and talk a little bit about what this all speaks to, as well as the idea of self-compassion, treating ourselves the way we would want others, the way we treat others, rather, treating ourselves the way that we treat others when something happens. Again, it could be a mistake, a setback, a failure, insert whatever word you want to use to describe that setback. But how we treat others is usually very kindly and very compassionately. We often don't treat ourselves the same way. And so the idea of self-compassion, Dr. Kristen Neff has done a lot of research on this. And she has books out, and she's on social media. You can find her on Instagram and posts really wonderful information. But she talks about self-compassion has three constructs, and it has to do with mindfulness, has to do with realizing that there's a common humanity among us, and self-kindness. And so I want to walk us through a technique. I'll talk about it, and then I'll actually ask you all to do it along with me. So it's really, if the idea is taking 3 deep breaths, and during those 3 deep breaths, kind of take yourself through, that's the self-compassion cycle, if you will. So the first is to think about mindfulness and acknowledging what you're feeling. So this is hard right now. I'm feeling tense. I'm sad. I feel lonely, whatever it is, acknowledging that feeling or what's going on with you. And in the second breath, then recognizing our common humanity. I'm not alone in this. Other people have similar challenges. Other people feel this way too sometimes. And then with the third breath, there's a self-kindness piece. So what can I do right now to be kind to myself? How can I be kind to myself? How can I express kindness? So I want us to do that together, just in your mind's eye. If you're alone, you want to speak these things out loud to yourself, go ahead. So we're going to take a deep breath and say to yourself something along the lines of, this is hard right now. And after you've let go of that exhale, on the next breath, you're recognizing, I'm not alone. Other people feel this way too sometimes. And then on that third breath, as you bring in that air, you bring in that oxygen, you're thinking, what can I do right now that would be kind to myself? And you exhale, release that breath. And maybe the kindness is taking a few more deep breaths. Maybe the kindness is putting some lotion on your hands. Maybe it's taking a sip of tea, taking a walk around the block, calling a friend. It can manifest in lots of different ways for ourselves. I will tell you as well, if you're someone who appreciates and likes physical touch and has been missing that over the past couple of years, as we have not been with people a lot in person or hugging people for sure, other than maybe family members if you live with folk or have been visiting with folk, but is you can give yourself a hug and your body really doesn't differentiate that. Your body doesn't know. Our bodies don't know that it's not you. You know that you're giving yourself a hug, but our brains don't know the difference. So you can do it right now. You can give yourself a hug. Just wrap your arms around yourself and give yourself a hug. You can sway side to side, whatever would feel good to you. Give yourself a hug, and hugging yourself and taking a couple of breaths. I mean, that's magic. But you can do that, and your brain receives that input into the nervous system as you're being hugged, you're being held, you're being comforted. And so you can do that for yourself, especially if you're having a particularly bad day or you're like, I can't cope right now. Just take a moment to give yourself that hug. Take a few breaths. Remember those breaths. I'm feeling tense right now. Other people feel this way too sometimes. How can I be kind to myself in this moment? And repeat as often as you need to. This is one of those things I think you can lather, rinse, repeat, and do as often as you need to do to give yourself that sense of calm. So we all have days that don't go the way that we planned. We all have days that are days, weeks, months, whatever it is, that kind of tax our patience, that we've had lots of stress throughout the day for maybe many days in a row. And I didn't get into this earlier, but we know medically, scientifically, that when we are in that high alert state of stress for prolonged periods of time, that's not good for our bodies. So for example, the hormones that get released, cortisol is one of them, and cortisol sort of gets a bad rap in in the news or whatever. But because too much cortisol is not good for our bodies. But we do need cortisol to get out of bed in the morning. That's sort of our wake up hormone. Melatonin is our go to sleep hormone, if you will. It's very simplistic, but that's kind of, so we do need cortisol, but throughout the day, all the stressors that happen, then that cortisol starts to build up. And that's over time, long periods of time, that is not good for our bodies and can lead to things like heart disease and diabetes and stroke and stuff like that. So learning how to cope, the breathing technique that we just did, we're going to do another technique, a few techniques in a couple of minutes, can help us mitigate that cortisol, that effect of the cortisol, and get us back to that steady state that our body prefers to be in. And so think about for yourself, how do you know when your glass, we use this metaphor of having a full cup versus half full and empty cup. How do you know when your glass is getting low? When you're becoming depleted? How does that show up for you in your mood, your behavior, your thoughts? So for example, I know for me, when I'm under stress and not taking care of myself, so I'm not practicing the skills that we've talked about already, the taking the deep breaths, the recognizing the thinking trap and taking that pause and deciding what I want to do, observing and making it some sort of change in my thought process or address my feelings about it. I can become, so my glass is starting to get low, I can become irritable and impatient with people. And so that I'll know like, I've been really impatient. I was short with that person. Or I'm getting very frustrated in traffic. Traffic is an easy one, for me, traffic is an easy one to get frustrated by. But, if I notice, it's like, okay, what's going on with me? Like something I'm not, I'm kind of in a higher level of stress than I normally am. Let me address what's going on. For some of us, you might experience the sensation of what's known nowadays as being hangry, when you're hungry and then become angry because you haven't eaten. That happens to me too. I can get irritable, and it's normal. When our blood sugar drops, you get irritable, like your body is needing food. So knowing these triggers in yourself and then having your skills nearby, whether in that case, if I have a snack in my office, that's helpful. But a skill in other times might be to go outside and take a walk. It might be to call a friend. It might be to take a few deep breaths, to meditate, to listen to some music, to pray, whatever it is. So think about for yourself what you do to fill back up. And if you have the inclination or a moment, just jot a couple of things down or type them into your computer or your phone. The things that you will do to fill up, and know that every stressor does not require or does not respond to the same exact coping skill. So we need a toolkit. We need more than one thing that we can do. And maybe think about it in sort of levels too, of complexity or levels of threat, if you will. Maybe for a low level stressor, I need to take a few deep breaths and, it gets me through it. For maybe a medium level stressor, that means that might be one where I want to step away from my desk. I'm thinking about during the workday and take a walk. Maybe for a high level stressor, maybe that's where I take some breaths. I also go take a walk, but then I connect with a colleague or someone to talk through the issue or what I might need to do, or make sure like, what is my perspective on this? Am I falling into a thinking trap? If I feel sort of lost, that's my thing, is to go seek some support. I'm going to ask a resource when I'm at a place where I can't figure things out or I don't know what to do. Or I'm just feeling, so overwhelmed. But just know what you can do for yourself and with yourself with different levels of stressors. And I encourage you to write those things down for yourself too. Kind of when I'm feeling low stress, it's this. When I'm feeling medium stress, it's this. When I'm feeling high stress, it's this. Being physically active is often very helpful. Sometimes, I like to exercise, and so that's something I do on a regular basis. But sometimes it might be like I'm going to go do something like really, I'm going to go hard at it or something. When I'm having a particularly stressful time in life. Here's another way to deal with stressful situations, and it's the 4 A's: avoid, alter, adapt, and accept. And so we can do a couple of things when we're dealing with a stressful situation. We can change the situation, or we can change our reaction or response to the situation. So changing a situation, we can avoid that stressor. So let's use traffic as an example, because traffic can be stressful, depending on the time of day you leave your house and all those things and what's going on. So I can avoid. So, and actually I do. I live in Lexington, South Carolina, work at the University of South Carolina. And so the morning traffic can be really, 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 really hectic. And so what I do, I avoid that by leaving my house. If I'm at my home, leaving my house early enough to beat the school flashing light for the school that's right down the street from my house, so I go through that before all the school traffic starts up, right? And I say if I'm at my house because I'm at the gym some mornings and that's closer to work. So I leave plenty early in the morning. On the way home, though, it's a different story. It can take me well over an hour to get home sometimes because of traffic. And so, I can't avoid that in that situation. I just can't avoid that. So I might take a different route, a route that maybe has less traffic lights, which I do on a regular basis, to maybe avoid some of that. You can alter the stressor. So that would be doing something like, again, the traffic idea is taking a different route. Making sure, that you're leaving at a different time, leaving plenty of time for folk. I know that our downtown Columbia trains. So making sure that you're leaving at a time that you're not going to get stuck by a train potentially. I can also then change my own reaction to that stressor. And one is I can adapt. So, you know what? I know that my trip home, no matter what, is going to take a solid 45 minutes. And sometimes an hour or more, depending on what's going on in traffic world on a Monday through Friday. So I can adapt to that by doing something on my drive that gives me pleasure. I can listen to music. I can listen to a podcast. I can listen to the news if that calms me down. It doesn't, so I don't listen to it. But you can just listen to something. I can talk to a friend on the phone. I have hands-free ability to talk to someone on the phone if I want to. So there's things that I can do to adapt to it, and just kind of then finally, I can accept that stressor. I accept that traffic is what it is, that I do all that I can on my commute home, because again, for me, that is a longer thing. And I can take the route that takes me through less traffic lights, and I can just have a positive attitude about it, honestly, right? So I can do that to myself. For some folks, when in driving, they'd just rather have no noise and might like just to spend the time paying attention to the road, which I do, but paying attention to the road, maybe noticing, nature around them as best they can while you're driving. So anyway, so we can accept those stressors. So there's a few ways that we can deal with stressful situations, including, especially what I talked about earlier, is putting in that intentional pause so that we can recognize the thought and kind of get ourselves out of that cycle of the thought and behavior and consequence kind of cycle that I showed earlier, and know that we can respond to something versus reacting to something. Sometimes a reaction is just a split second, sort of a knee-jerk response to something, and isn't necessarily the most authentic way we might want to handle a situation that we would if we had a moment to stop and think. So it's always okay to add that pause. I want to share with you a couple of grounding techniques, a grounding practice. And these are great for times when any of us are having those times when we're feeling overwhelmed, when we're feeling that our thoughts, our minds are racing, and we can't stop it. I can't get out of that cycle of thinking that I'm unworthy, or I'm stupid, or no one wants to be around me, or I'm never going to get picked again to do this project, or give a presentation, whatever it is. So to be able to, again, to put in that pause. And so I invite you to do this with me. Grounding techniques are designed to get us back into our five senses, as opposed to staying in a swirling mind, in a mind that we feel like we can't turn off. So this is a way to get us out of those thoughts, get out of the sea. Like you're kind of swimming in an ocean of thoughts and the waves are crashing. Each thought, there's a wave crashing and you feel like you can't get out of it. We gotta like ground ourselves into the sand, come out and ground ourselves in the sand. So With a grounding practice, it's really helpful to have your feet flat on the floor, to literally ground yourself to the earth, to feel that connection. If you're sitting in a chair, feeling your hips, your sits bones on that chair. And then just notice your body in space. Just notice what you're noticing. And if you decided to press your feet into the floor firmly and your hips into the chair firmly, see if you can soften it. We just want to be aware of that connection without forcing anything. Just let your body just be. Closing your eyes, maybe, although I will ask you to open them in a second if you've closed them. And pay attention to your breathing. See if you can take some deep breaths that helps to slow the breath down. And then here we get into the five senses, and I'll do it quickly. We don't have a whole lot of time to do this, but I'll do it quickly. So then you look at 5 things you can see wherever you are in your space and describe them to yourself. If you're alone, describe them out loud. If you're not alone, describe them in your mind's eye, in your head. And so, for example, in my office, I see a pillow that has the colors of teal and orange and white. I have a Gumby and Pokey doll in my office. If you all know Gumby and Pokey, so Gumby is green and Pokey is orange, and so on. Describing what you see, and then thinking, 4 things I can feel. I have one of my hands is resting on my leg, so I can feel the touch of that fabric. I can pick up, I have a mug of tea, I can feel the smoothness of that mug, and so on. 3 things you can hear. So notice what you're hearing, not so much like I'm straining to hear, listen for something, but just notice what you hear. You might hear the sound of a clock ticking if there's one of those near you. You might hear some background noise coming from somewhere. You might hear some music or car outside, whatever it is. Notice what you hear. Notice then 2 things you can smell. And this may or may not be possible depending where you are, but I can smell my tea and notice what it smells like. You might be in a place where you have a candle, or you might have, some food or candy, you can sniff. You might have put on lotion today and smell your hand and see if you can smell it, or perfume or anything. And then finally, one thing you can taste. And again, you might not be in a place or a space where you can taste something readily, but I happen to still have some tea, so I could take a sip of this tea and notice what it tastes like. So doing all of that gets you out of those racing thoughts. And when you're doing that exercise, after you've done the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, just notice how you feel. Notice any changes. You can also, for some folks, just start reciting something, the letters of the alphabet. Sing a song in your head that you know. Anything like that to get, again, something that's very sort of regimented, or like can't think of the word. Sorry, I'm searching for a word that I can't find. But anyway, it's something that you can, you know the lyrics to a song, excuse me, anything like that can get you out of. You can take an object in your space, wherever you are. It could be anything. It can be a pen, a pencil, your phone. If you have I have lots of, they're not fidget spinners, but things that I can fidget with in my hands. I'm more of a tactile person, so I can just kind of manipulate this in my hands and notice it. And I can talk to myself about what it looks like, the color of it, the feel of it, the smell of it, doing all those things with an object, describing to yourself. So those are things that you can do to help ground yourself if you're in a place where your mind is racing. Here's a quote. I know I need to open it up for questions in just a minute, so I'm going to give you 2 more slides here real quick. Here's a quote that I thought was really inspiring to me is, "We do not fear the unknown. We fear what we think we know about the unknown." Right? So it's not necessarily, here we are going off in this picture, this kayaker is maybe at a waterfall, but we don't know how deep that is or how steep the drop is necessarily, right? So we fear what we think we know about about the unknown. So just let that sit with you. And then one final thing before we open it up to Q&A is to think about gratitude. And this is something that has been proven to help improve people's reported sense of well-being. The more that we can express gratitude, the better people report that they feel in terms of well-being and happiness. And so I encourage us all that on a daily basis, express gratitude for something or someone. even if it's that I got up this morning, that I have hot water in my shower on demand, that on my way in to work or school or wherever, I happen to see a blue jay fly by, whatever it is. I'm grateful for my parents, for my family, for my friends, whatever. It really does help. The other thing too about in the slide that I just showed about fear of the unknown is to also, sometimes we fear people's reactions. Sometimes we fear sometimes our own thoughts. Sometimes we fear that we might not be accepted. I will say, and I said it at the outset, to ask for help when you need it. Know what the resources are in your area. And if you're not sure, again, Google is a really great resource. Mental health resources in my area. Finding, support that you need. Know who your go-to people are and be a go-to person for someone. So when I know that when me being irritated and impatient means that I'm stressed and maybe need some support, is something that I can tell a trusted colleague, hey, when you notice this is going on with me, come check in with me, because I haven't noticed it yet, apparently. And vice versa. Tell someone, you be that support person for someone, and you let them know, hey, if you notice this, if I'm starting to act in this way, if I'm withdrawing, if I'm not participating, if I keep saying no to going to do stuff that I normally do, check in, because it means something's not going well for me at that moment. I'll write that, right? So just be aware and be willing to ask for help, because you know what? People want to help. We just aren't mind readers. So we have to be, ask for that help, ask for that support when you need it. And I'm sure people will give it to you, because we all like to help. We humans like to help. And then finally, I'll open up for questions. My final slide here is to this quote by Eckhart Tolle: be aware of your breathing. Notice how this takes attention away from your thinking and creates space for us to have that ability to respond versus react. So I'm going to stop sharing and open it up to see if any questions have come in.
You all are able to use the raise your hand feature if you want to ask a question, or you're able to put it in the chat box. I can allow you to unmute yourselves if you raise your hand on the Zoom feature. So feel free to go whichever route you would like. We do have our question is, are you able to get a copy of the presentation? Absolutely, I'll send that out right after this. Do we have any other questions?
You're welcome. You're welcome, Rod.
Let's see if anyone's raised their hand. Well, it looks like we don't have any questions, but if we have any follow-up, Ms. O'Brien, do you mind dropping your email in the chat box?
I'll do
and
it.
Thank you. I do have a follow-up poll that takes about 1 minute for everyone to take. I'm going to launch it now, if everyone doesn't mind taking it very quickly. And then as soon as you're done, you're welcome to hop off the meeting. Thank you all so much for being here.